Vancouver's streets feel different now. Rows of tents line East Hastings, a quiet battalion beneath rain-soaked tarps.
What happened to Vancouver?
I've spent the last week here, watching from dawn until nightfall. Every intersection seems to carry a heavier silence. By 2025, homelessness has surged. More than 5,000 people in Metro Vancouver are living without shelter. This isn't only a Canadian crisis. It's a warning to all of North America. Homeless in America reflects the same unraveling. Crushing rents, broken systems, and lives swept away overnight. I've met the faces, listened to the stories, pored over the data. What comes next is the raw truth, and why it calls for our attention before the next city succumbs.
The mayor is talking about his plan to stop building new supportive housing in Vancouver, specifically in the downtown east side.
That's horrible. That my chances of housing just went down how many percent? That sucks.
It reminds me of before the Olympics when they were, I was told by many people that they were handing out bus tickets to the homeless and stuff to get them off the streets so they could have it cleaned up for the Olympics. And now it seems like they're doing the same thing just to get, I think it seems like they're trying to get the neighborhood back for the real estate or whatever, I don't know. They don't have anywhere for you to go. They just tell you to get off the street and take all your stuff, so like, you know, you can't even keep anything, or like blankets and stuff, they throw it all in the garbage every day on you.
The numbers that keep Vancouver awake after dark. The 2025 count shows more than 5,200 people in Metro Vancouver living without shelter. But I don't need statistics to see that truth. I've walked these same streets. Each morning along East Hastings, tents fill the sidewalks like a city inside another. And by nightfall, even more emerge. Every one of them hides a story few ever pause to listen to. Here in Vancouver, roughly 2,700 residents have no home, with nearly 1,900 sleeping outside, under bridges, in doorways, or on park benches that once echoed with laughter and children's play. If you stand there long enough, the numbers turn into faces. Indigenous communities remain the hardest hit, carrying the weight of long-standing injustice.
People are very vulnerable out here. Families with jobs and kids cannot find housing. They're sleeping in tents. It's a total human rights violation is what it is. You know, I've seen refugee camps in other countries. This is exactly what it looks like. We are Canadian refugees. This is a Canadian refugee camp.
Men in their 30s and 40s drift by with weary eyes, searching for work or warmth. While older adults, some who once owned homes, now sit quietly on cold pavement, holding tight to what little remains. Their stories overlap: rising rent, a job lost, an eviction that came too quickly to stop. The downtown east side still bears the heaviest burden, but the crisis has spread well beyond it. I've driven through Delta, the North Shore, and Ridge Meadows, where tents now stand in parking lots, behind stores, and along forgotten back roads. Even Vancouver Island, once seen as a quiet refuge, is starting to show deep fractures. Locals quietly admit the real figures are higher, that many survive unseen in woods or beside remote highways, invisible to the official count. What's hardest to accept is the speed of this collapse. 2 years ago, most believed the worst had passed, that recovery would follow the pandemic. But the reverse happened. Each new tent, each person asking for change on the corner, feels like one more thread pulled from the fabric holding this city together. And this isn't just Vancouver's tragedy. It belongs to something far larger. From Seattle to Portland to Los Angeles, the same story unfolds. Homeless in America has become a mirror of a system under strain. Rents rising beyond reach, wages lagging, programs shrinking, and a mental health network that failed long ago. Now, standing in the rain, surrounded by forgotten lives, one thought keeps echoing. If this can happen here, in one of the richest and most livable cities on Earth, what hope remains for the rest? Addiction, the quiet battle waged on Vancouver's streets.
That's a $10 flap of fentanyl.
And that's dark green.
Dark green. That's the shit that's dropping people.
Do you know what purity that is?
15% fentanyl, 3% heroin, the rest is baby laxative, sugars.
Is it possible that I'd die if I took that?
Yep. All depends how high your immune system, your tolerance.
I mean, I've never taken fentanyl before.
If you took that, you'd die.
100%.
100%.
In Vancouver, the grip of addiction keeps tightening, touching nearly every block and alleyway in the city. What started years ago as a contained issue has now become a relentless state of emergency. Synthetic drugs flow quietly through underground networks, spreading devastation across all ages and walks of life. Paramedics now respond to dozens of overdose calls every week, and many of those rescued are living without shelter. Over 1/3 of Vancouver's unhoused residents now battle substance use, mental illness, or both, an overlap that makes healing even more difficult. Local organizations fight daily to keep people alive and protected. Harm reduction sites offer sterile equipment, safe spaces, and medication that reverses overdoses in the nick of time. These centers save lives every day, yet they can't replace what's missing most: permanent housing, consistent treatment, and a path back to dignity and purpose. A brief walk down East Hastings shows the human toll. People sitting silently on the pavement, trapped between endurance and hope, waiting for a system that still moves too slowly. This emergency didn't begin overnight. When Riverview Hospital, once British Columbia's central mental health facility, closed decades ago, hundreds were released with almost no follow-up care. The plan for community-based treatment never fully came to life. With limited options, many of those patients wound up in shelters, emergency wards, or behind bars. That failed transition planted the roots of a crisis that continues to shape Vancouver's landscape today. Now, in 2025, the connection between mental health, addiction, and homelessness can't be denied. Without access to reliable care, affordable housing, or long-term therapy, countless people keep slipping through the same gaps. Frontline workers and volunteers give everything they have, yet their resources remain overextended. This cycle plays out across the continent, from Vancouver to Seattle to San Francisco, each city facing a mirror image of the same struggle. Unless healthcare, housing, and humanity come together, this crisis will keep taking lives quietly, one street after another. The lasting scars COVID left across Vancouver's streets. COVID didn't just shut down businesses. It shattered what little security many people still had. When lockdowns hit in 2020, service and hourly jobs vanished almost overnight. Restaurant workers, janitors, hotel clerks, and cleaners, the people who kept cities functioning, were among the first to lose their income. Rent freezes offered a brief sense of relief, but when they expired, thousands were already months behind. Evictions came soon after, and what began as a temporary crisis turned into long-term homelessness. By 2025, that economic shock had hardened into a lasting shadow, stretching across the city. Shelters, overcrowded even before the pandemic, buckled under the strain. Safety limits reduced bed capacity, forcing many to sleep outside or in unsafe corners. Emergency housing projects opened in response, but most were underfunded and short-lived. When restrictions finally eased, many of those temporary shelters shut down, leaving people stranded once again. Outreach organizations across Vancouver reported a surge in chronic homelessness as those displaced during COVID struggled to rebuild stability. The pandemic also overwhelmed mental health and recovery systems. Many clinics cut hours or went virtual, options often out of reach for unhoused people. Isolation magnified anxiety, despair, and addiction. Food banks faced shortages, therapy waitlists grew longer, and exhausted social workers fought to meet impossible demand. The same distance that slowed the virus left countless people feeling unseen, disconnected, and forgotten. Seniors and immigrant populations suffered the deepest blows. Fear, stigma, and financial pressure drove some elders out of shared housing or community centers. Those surviving on fixed incomes couldn't handle rising costs and had nowhere to turn. Many were forced to depend on shelters, sleep in cars, or rely on friends' couches to survive. By 2025, the pandemic's toll is unmistakable. COVID didn't cause homelessness, but it exposed and widened every weak point: soaring rents, fragile mental health care, and the lack of affordable housing. Cities from Vancouver to Seattle to Los Angeles still carry those wounds. Expanding tent camps, strained local services, and people struggling to recover what was lost. The public health emergency may have ended, but its echoes still shape daily life on every corner of the city. When the price of shelter breaks the human spirit. Rent in Vancouver has broken loose and gone feral. Between 2021 and 2024, average prices jumped nearly 20%, turning ordinary apartments into unreachable prizes. A tiny one-bedroom now swallows more than half of an average paycheck. Think about that. Bills, food, bus fare, and whatever's left won't cover a roof. Landlords call it an upgrade after a coat of paint, then hike the rent. Tenants get eviction notices instead of apologies. Kids lose their rooms, parents lose their footing, and whole neighborhoods drain away like someone pulled a plug. Last week, I spoke with Robert, 68, grease still clinging to his hands from 4 decades as a mechanic. Bad hip, worse luck. His landlord added $300 to the rent in one shot. Medication or a place to sleep? He chose the sidewalk. He's not an exception, he's the new normal. People who worked, raised families, paid taxes, all erased by a single notice. One signature on a lease adjustment and decades of effort vanish overnight. The mild coastal winters act like a magnet. Folks drift in from the prairies, the Rockies, anywhere the cold cuts too deep. Same scene in California. Cars from the Midwest parked beside tents because frostbite hurts more than failure. These cities aren't springboards anymore. They're landing zones for those who ran out of options. And then comes the statistic that hits like a punch. More than half of those sleeping outside, with no tent, no tarp, no cover, are Indigenous. That's not a housing glitch, that's a national wound. As displacement, residential schools, broken promises, the debt gets paid in sleepless nights and frozen hands. Homeless in America wear the same face again and again. Policies that punish poverty, histories that never healed, and a housing market that treats shelter like a stock portfolio. Vancouver's crisis is just the newest invoice, marked urgent, addressed to every one of us. The faces I can't forget. I still recall the first time I met Maria, not her real name, but the one she asked me to use. She was 57, Indigenous, and had been sleeping in Oppenheimer Park for nearly a month. Her landlord had sold the building she'd called home for 12 years, leaving her with nowhere to turn. Her eyes carried generations of pain, residential schools, foster homes, and now the street. I never thought I'd be the one holding a sign, she told me softly. I worked 2 jobs until my knees gave out. Her story isn't unusual. It echoes through Vancouver's downtown east side. Then there's Daniel, a welder in his early 40s. He rolled up his sleeve to show the scar from an accident that ended his career. The disability payment he receives barely covers groceries, let alone rent. Now he sleeps in a tent by Crab Park, a space that feels like both refuge and risk. Just last month, a man was stabbed there in broad daylight. Daniel doesn't speak of fear. He speaks of endurance. He checks the tide chart so his few belongings don't get soaked and keeps away from dangerous corners at night. He isn't a figure in a statistic. He's a person trying to make it through one day at a time. What troubles me most is how much younger the faces are becoming. Covenant House Vancouver reports that nearly 1 in 3 unhoused youth in 2025 are fleeing domestic violence or aging out of foster care with nowhere to land. I met a 16-year-old named Jay outside a youth center, backpack slung over his shoulder. He said he'd been couch hopping for half a year before running out of doors to knock on. His story repeats itself. Too many kids are left to fend for themselves the moment they turn 18. We hand them a bus ticket and call it independence. Each story I hear makes it harder to keep walking. Behind every tent is a person who once had a home, a routine, a dream. They're not asking for pity. They're asking for a chance. Maria wants a small room with a lock on the door. Daniel wants steady work and safety. Jay just wants a bed and a tomorrow he can believe in. Their faces linger long after I leave the block. They remind me that homelessness isn't distant. It's here, expanding around us while leaders debate and budgets stall. The question that follows me is simple. How many more Marias, Daniels, and Jays must there be before we finally decide to act? The efforts that keep a fragile hope alive. Amid all the despair, there are still flickers of progress. Small, flawed, but genuine. In March 2025, Canada's federal and provincial governments approved a nearly $80 million plan to combat homelessness and clear encampments in Vancouver, Abbotsford, and Kamloops. The funding backs pallet shelters, outreach teams, and mobile addiction treatment units. Vancouver also opened 4 new safe stay communities this year. Rows of modular homes with counseling, harm reduction programs, and on-site security. It's not a full solution, but it's a beginning. BC Housing expanded its winter shelter capacity to 6,700 beds, a 20% boost that saved countless lives during last winter's brutal storms. I toured one of those safe stay sites on a gray October afternoon. The rooms were modest but tidy, with heaters, locks, and mailboxes, small comforts that mean everything after nights spent outside. One resident, Carla, proudly showed me her little garden. "For the first time in years, I'm growing something instead of just surviving," she said. That moment carried more truth than any report I've ever read. Momentum is also building behind Indigenous-led housing programs that emphasize healing as much as shelter. The Luman Native Housing Society, which co-led the 2025 homeless count, now runs culturally rooted housing projects on Vancouver Island. Residents join ceremonies, language classes, and counseling led by elders. Early results show fewer people returning to homelessness than in standard shelters. One local leader, Fran Hunt Janucci, told me, "We don't just need beds, we need belongings." Her words stayed with me. They remind us that community can mend wounds in ways government policy rarely can. Across British Columbia, community groups are stepping in where bureaucracy falls short. Every March, hundreds of volunteers scour alleys, parks, and shelters to ensure no one is left uncounted. Local efforts, like the Cathet Coalition, serve hot meals daily, while Covenant House's annual Sleep Out events raise both funds and awareness. Last year's event drew major corporate sponsors who pledged continued support. These local movements prove that when leadership stalls, compassion keeps going. Still, scaling progress remains the biggest challenge. Since 2017, British Columbia has poured billions into supportive housing, moving more than 5,600 people off the streets for good. That's real progress. But with over 5,200 still unhoused and rent climbing faster than wages, it feels like running hard and staying in the same place. The truth is, homeless in America face the same uphill battle everywhere. We build, we fall behind, and we build again, always trying to stay one breath ahead of a crisis that never rests. What we must stand for, and what we can do right now. So, where do we go from here? First, we need lasting solutions, not another round of quick fixes. Cities must overhaul zoning laws to allow affordable, higher-density housing close to transit lines. Vacant luxury condos should face extra taxes that fund social housing. Addiction must be addressed as a health crisis, not a personal flaw. We need more treatment facilities where people can get help the same day, not months later. And we must rebuild mental health care with the same determination once used to construct highways and railways. Next, we have to vote with intention and spend with awareness. Support leaders who prioritize housing and healthcare over headlines and political gain. Give to organizations that actually move the needle, those building homes, running recovery programs, and helping people rebuild their lives. If you can't give money, give your time. Volunteer, advocate, be present. Real transformation doesn't start in press conferences. It starts when ordinary people finally say enough. Most of all, we need to push back against despair. The belief that nothing changes is a lie that protects those who benefit from inaction. Cities have shown that modular housing can rise in weeks, and harm reduction programs save lives when they're fully funded. Progress is possible, but it requires the same shared resolve we've shown in times of crisis and war. Homelessness isn't just a West Coast issue or an urban inconvenience. It's spreading across the continent, revealing fractures in our housing, health, and social foundations. This is our moment to decide what kind of society we want to be. Will we keep turning away, or will we start acting like neighbors again?